You're looking at the positive battery cables on my 95 Honda Accord, and as you can see, they are severely corroded, even back under the insulation. This is the one that leads to the fuse box. This one leads to the starter. Now the negative cable up top doesn't look that bad, but if you follow it down to where it grounds onto the engine, that's the bottom end of the negative battery cable, completely covered in corrosion. So I am going to replace the cables. The question is, do I go with OEM or do I build cables myself? I'm going to do some research and decide what to do. And I guess I have to tell you what I did. All of the cable, positive and negative, is 4-gauge power wire. This positive cable goes to the fuse box, this one to the starter, valve cover, the chassis body, the transmission. So now it's time to get the old cables off. I'm going to clean all the metal surfaces with this wire brush attachment, and I'm also going to put battery terminal grease on every one. First thing to do is take all this off, and I'm actually going to take the battery out because that'll make it easier to get down to the starter. Underneath this rubber boot is where that cable bolts onto the starter. That looks like 12 millimeter. And it is 12 millimeter. And luckily, I have a low profile 1/4-inch ratchet that will just barely let that fit in there. So if you don't have a skinny ratchet like that, you may need an open end wrench to get this off. There's a bracket down here that holds the negative battery cable, the one that goes down and grounds on the transmission. It also holds that positive battery cable that we just disconnected from the starter. You can't pull it out of there. So I'm going to break that bracket loose here and see if that helps us at all. I just have to disconnect this negative battery cable from where it grounds onto the transmission. That bolt down there is 10 millimeter also. Got it. I thought that was the last thing. I thought I'd be able to pull these cables up now, but there's still something holding it, and it's underneath this plate that the battery sits on. And the reason all that had to come out, that bracket, that blue bracket right there, that's holding in the positive battery cable, the one that we broke loose from the starter. And there's a 10 millimeter nut right down there to take that bracket loose. Now the last place to disconnect positive battery cables in this fuse box, right there, 8 millimeter. One more to go, negative battery cable, 10 millimeter bolts in right here. Much more work involved than what I thought, but there it is. You can see all that green water coming out. That's water mixed with the corrosion inside of these protective sleeves. Now over here on the passenger side, we have a ground going from the valve cover down to here. Then we have a short little section of ground wire from here to there. So this one labeled VC for valve cover. One end of this will go there. The other end will loop around and bolt back right there. And I'm going to leave this short section, but I am going to break it loose and clean underneath. Let's get back to the battery side. So the question now is how to combine the new cables with the old brackets and protective sleeves. So let me get all this taken apart. I know these snips aren't the best thing to use to cut this wire, but it's all I got. Here's all the old stuff that's going in the trash. Maybe not all of it. Some of this cable is still good, so I may salvage some of that. Here's the old stuff I'm going to try to save. I'm going to get that cleaned up and then see how it works with the new cables. Before we try to put all this back together, let's make sure that this, where they drilled it out, let's make sure that'll fit over the stud on the starter. And no, it will not. It needs to be drilled out just a little bit more. Just FYI, that's 5/16. So let's see if that'll work. And yes, it will. That's perfect. Starting with the positive battery cable that goes to the starter. I have a metal coat hanger. I'm putting a hook at the end. Hook it on the cable that goes to the starter and try to pull that cable through. And there we go. Now the rubber boot. That should slide through. Some needle nose pliers. Get this old tape off. And now I just need some electric tape right here. Now for the positive cable that runs up to the fuse box, the old sleeve is narrower, so this is not going to go through there. 69-cent Harbor Freight scissors. I'm just going to cut it all the way down the side. That way I can slip it over this cable. So now I can slide that cable back through, but this thing's going to get in the way. I'm not going to be able to get it back on the way it is, but I will rig it up somehow. I'm just going to do it the whole way. Tape it all up. There was some old tape holding this piece together. It's cut through right there. So I'm going to tape that back together, but not so tight that I can't move this because I'm not sure exactly where it needs to go. So this line's going to go back to the fuse box. This line's going to go down to the starter. This bolt's down to hold the bracket in place. So I'm going to put this bolt back in here. And now at the other end, that's where this bracket was. So this would go on which way? Like that. Right? So negative cable going to the transmission is going to go through here, here, and there. But in order to get through these, that clip's going to have to come apart. Hopefully it does. Yes, because that has to go through. Chassis, transmission, starter, fuse box. All right, let's get this thing done before we get to the car. Almost. That hadn't been off in a few years. Using some brake clean down there where the starter bolt's on. Now some anti-corrosive lubricant spray. Some battery terminal grease. And where that negative cable grounds onto the chassis. Trying to get that starter cable in. And one word of advice, get the bolt started through the bracket before you put it down there. Before I tighten that down completely, I'm going to make sure I can get the cable on the starter. You can see my boot is cracking. It's falling apart, but right now I can't do anything about that. My old ratchet is dying on me. It's changing gears on me, but I almost got it. I'll finish that up with an opening wrench. All right. Starter boot did not make it. Tore in half, so I'm going to have to get another one of those. But did get the bracket on and got that tight. And that boot tearing on the starter like that, that was my fault. I should not have taped it down to the cable. I should have left it loose. That way I would have had more room to move it around and I wouldn't have tried to stretch it like I did when it tore. So don't tape the boot down. That would be my advice. Now negative cable on the transmission. If your cable is like this and it has a high side and a flat side, you're going to want to put that flat side up. If you install it the other way with that rise pointing up, your fuse box cover is not going to snap down all the way. The flat side up, it'll snap in like it should. One thing I noticed a minute ago, nut and bolt were missing, but luckily I found them. And we are done. Time to crank it up. Everything works. Tachometer, temperature gauge, fuel gauge. Got the AC going, that's fine. Radio. Well, I lost my presets. See if the brights work. Yes. Let's see what the alternator's putting out. 14.2, so we're good. I'll put a link below in the description to the cables used in the video. They were $55 for the set, and they fit 94 through 97 Accords. And I know I probably could have made them up myself for half that price, but I don't have any experience making up cables. It was worth it to me to pay a little more money to know that I had a set that was made right. And even though this is shown on a 95 Honda Accord, this should apply to other years of older Accords, Civics, Preludes, Odysseys, any Honda with a 4-cylinder F22 B2 engine, which is what this is. Hope this helps you out. Thanks for watching.